In my junior year of college, I fell prey to the charms of a gym trainer. His methods of seduction were subtle yet masterful. Through the eyes of a straight man, he seemed nothing more than a good buddy, a dependable bro. By the time I realized the truth, I had already become his meal on a plate. Welcome to History Channel. Subscribe to follow all our latest adventures. Story begins. Before I met Jonathan Palin, I once had a brief romance. My partner at the time was my childhood friend, Luna Powell. She was smart, beautiful, genuine, and fearless. Luna knew almost everything about me. We had been close since we were kids, so much so that even our parents joked about us ending up together. The day we graduated high school, both our families were walking home together, and the adults teased about arranging our engagement. I didn't say a word because, when I thought about it seriously, no girl in my life had ever been as exceptional as Luna Powell, nor had anyone else accepted me so unconditionally. That day, she quietly grabbed my hand, leaned in close to my ear, and whispered, "Samuel, why don't we give it a try?" I said, "Eh." We dated. We went to the movies, shared dinners, and even traveled together, but something always felt missing. Once, she softly complained, asking why I could never catch the right atmosphere. I could only smile awkwardly, feeling the weight of her words. I found myself unable to do the intimate things couples naturally do. Is it because we're too familiar? Luna asked me one day. I nodded. Maybe that was it. I had never been in love before and didn't know how to love. Being with Luna felt more like an experiment than a romance. One afternoon, she pulled me to a stop, her hands still in mine. Looking up at me, she said with quiet resolve, "Then, why don't you kiss me?" I didn't move. Slowly, she rose onto the tips of her toes, her soft lips inching closer, yet my heart remained unmoved, like still water. She must have felt it too, because she didn't push. "Samuel, maybe we should just forget this," she said softly. And so, before the longest summer of our lives could even pass, our relationship quietly ended. We chose to walk away before we hurt each other, deciding to remain the best of friends instead. She once asked what kind of person I did like, and I couldn't answer her. At the airport, when we parted ways, she smiled and said, "Make more friends, Samuel. Otherwise, you'll have no luck with women." I reassured her not to worry, unaware that her words would come true. Women never seemed drawn to me. However, well, that was another story entirely. Both our families lamented our breakup, convinced we were a perfect match. My mother would often ask why I let Luna Powell go, and I'd give the standard reply, "We weren't a good fit." Luna, upon returning later, couldn't escape the same question. Her answer was earnest. "Samuel and I know each other too well. We're better as lifelong friends than lovers." I couldn't agree more. It was a trust built over more than a decade, but there's a line in every relationship, one we had tried to cross, only to realize it wasn't where we belonged. So, we stepped back to where we felt right. When I fell in love with Jonathan Palin, I thought back to Luna Powell. Suddenly, I realized she had seen through me long before I could see myself. Back then, I was still wandering, trying to find the way forward. I first met Jonathan Palin in the spring of my junior year during my internship at a company. It was nighttime, and the industrial park was ablaze with lights, silent and vast. I had just finished work when Luna Powell called me via video chat. As usual, she rambled cheerfully, jumping from topics like research papers to studying abroad, from breakfast that morning to where we'd live 20 years down the road. Her life felt so vibrant compared to mine. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "Samuel, I have a boyfriend now." I froze for a moment. It was her third boyfriend in college. She showed me a picture, thick brows, big eyes, exactly her type. As she kept talking, her voice light and slightly embarrassed, she covered her face with her hand. And at that moment, I realized this was what being in love looked like. That strange, elusive spark we had never shared. Later, after finishing a cigarette by the subway entrance, I was about to head back to campus when a man jogged up to me, holding out a flyer. The night was cool. He was bundled tightly in a down jacket, with a white wrist brace peeking out from his sleeve. He looked about 25 or 6, holding a gym flyer and a business card in his hand. "Hey, handsome, how about checking out our gym?" "We've got swimming too," he said with a grin. I hesitated for barely a second, and he seized the opportunity, enthusiastically rattling off the benefits, clearly trying to get me to sign up for a membership. Maybe I looked a little downcast because he clapped me on the shoulder and laughed. "Hey man, it's fine. If you don't want to sign up, don't. No need to look like I'm dragging you into a scam." His words took me by surprise, and I couldn't help but laugh. He was unexpectedly funny. I took the flyer and his business card. "Sorry, I'm rushing back to school. Maybe next time." His eyes lit up. "Hey, don't forget, Far End Fitness, right behind a university's back gate. Ask for Jonathan Palin. Don't go to the wrong guy." His voice carried through the chilly night air as I turned back for one last glance. He was already approaching his next target, beaming with energy. I was so exhausted that day I quickly forgot about the whole thing, collapsing into sleep as soon as I got back. By summer, on a weekend, Kelvin Miller dragged me to play basketball. The courts were buzzing with people, surrounded by a lively crowd. "Is there a match today?" I asked. "Nah," Kelvin grinned. "Some guy from outside the school came to challenge us." Both of us had been called in as reinforcements. As soon as I stepped onto the court, I recognized Jonathan Palin. He was wearing a sleeveless jersey and loose basketball shorts. He seemed to recognize me too. Smiling, he held the ball and said, "Let's have a good game. Don't go easy on me." Kelvin, competitive as always, shot back. "Don't worry. If I let you score even one more point, I lose." Jonathan's expression faltered momentarily, but he brushed it off with a laugh. Kelvin wasn't joking. He guarded Jonathan so tightly he didn't score another point. Eventually, Jonathan switched to defending me. When I dribbled past him, we collided, and he twisted his ankle. Kelvin immediately rushed over to help him off the court, asking if he was okay. I stood nearby, equally concerned. "Want me to take you to the campus clinic?" Jonathan touched his ankle, rotating it slowly, testing its limits. Then he looked up and smiled at me. "Man, you really didn't hold back, huh?" I apologized, stepping closer. "Better to get it checked out just in case." He stared at me for a brief 2 seconds. Seconds I wouldn't understand until much later. At the time, I thought nothing of it. I didn't realize that in those 2 fleeting moments, a thought had crossed his mind, something I wouldn't see coming. Jonathan's ankle was fine, but after we left the clinic, Kelvin had to rush off for soccer practice, leaving just the 2 of us standing in the square. Jonathan broke the silence with a chuckle. "Hey, got a driver's license?" "Yeah." "Do me a favor and drive me home?" Under the bright summer sun, his smile held a pull I couldn't quite resist. He lived not far from a university, only a 20-minute drive. During that short ride, he asked casually, "What's your name, by the way?" "Samuel Sleeden," I answered, turning the wheel. "And why haven't you come to sign up for the gym yet?" I smiled awkwardly. "I've been busy with my internship. Forgot all about it." "Oh, what do you do?" "Data analysis and integrated management." He raised an eyebrow, a hint of admiration in his expression. "That'll look great on your resume." I smiled faintly. "I'm planning on grad school, hoping to refine my skills through projects." He nodded approvingly. "Got a mentor in mind?" "Dean Palin." His lips curled into a knowing smile, and I frowned slightly, confused. "What?" "Nothing," he said, shaking his head. When we arrived at his place, he handed me another business card. "Let's play ball again sometime." I stared at the card in my hand, thin and unremarkable, but for some reason, I found myself looking forward to that next time. It was a long time before I saw Jonathan Palin again. After ending my internship early to prepare for graduate exams, I buried myself in practice tests, determined to stay focused. As summer approached, Luna Powell showed up. I was in the library, bent over my work, when she texted me. "I'm on break and thought I'd come visit you." I frowned, typing back, "Okay, I'm at your campus gate." Startled, I quickly packed my things and rushed to meet her. Girls seemed to change with every passing year, and Luna had grown even more beautiful. Walking beside her, I couldn't help but notice the stares we attracted. She half covered her face and teased, "Samuel, you're quite popular around here. Look how many people are checking you out." I laughed. They're looking at you, the real beauty here. She accepted the compliment with perfect ease. Well, I am naturally stunning. I deserve admiration. She was curious about my school life and, as always, nosy about my relationships. No girlfriend yet? You came running out here as soon as I called? I joked back. Come on, no girl could ever compare to you. Her nose tilted to the sky, triumphant. Too late. I'm planning to study abroad with my boyfriend. Where? Oxford. Of course. She was always so well prepared, so sure of her path. I took her to the campus cafeteria, where we chatted over lunch. She shared stories about her life and even vented a little about her boyfriend. I listened patiently, playing the part of a dutiful friend. On a whim, I asked, if your boyfriend and I fell into a river, who would you save? She answered without hesitation. My boyfriend. I gasped, feigning betrayal, but she only laughed. Then, more softly, she admitted, because I love him. Love naturally makes you put someone first. I nodded with a smile, understanding her honesty. She grinned mischievously. Want me to introduce you to one of my friends? I think you'd get along. Before I could respond, I noticed Kelvin Miller approaching us with a tray in hand. Jonathan Palin was right behind him. Kelvin glanced at Luna, asking, "Who's this?" I smiled at her and said, "A friend. She's on break and came to visit me." I introduced them briefly, but Jonathan's eyes lingered on Luna, and he joked, "She's this pretty, and she's not your girlfriend? Your standards must be sky-high." Luna loved hearing comments like that. With her usual playful nature, she blurted out, "I'm his ex-girlfriend." The air froze. I never hid the fact that Luna and I once dated, though neither of us had ever treated it like a real romance. Kelvin looked awkward, tugging Jonathan away. I watched their retreating figures, wondering how the two of them even knew each other. It wasn't until later that I found out they were cousins. Very close cousins. During my senior year, the university held its 60th anniversary celebration, drawing alumni back from all over. I was one of the event hosts that day, and in the auditorium, I spotted Jonathan Palin again. He sat among the distinguished alumni, and for the first time, I saw him in a suit. It surprised me, almost as much as how good he looked in it. As I compared myself to him silently, I couldn't help but feel that I came up short. He mingled with former classmates and chatted effortlessly with professors and school leaders. Occasionally, I glanced his way, and once, our eyes met. He smiled and nodded before turning back to his conversation. There was something about him, mature, composed, with the air of someone who belonged. When the celebration ended, I stayed behind with the student council to clean up. Suddenly, someone tapped my shoulder. I turned and found Jonathan smiling at me. "Hey, mind doing me a favor?" He asked me to drive him home. At the time, I didn't question why, among so many people, he had singled me out. I just looked at him and felt an inexplicable pull to stay close to him. He'd had a bit to drink, though he handed me his car keys with the casual confidence of someone who assumed I wouldn't say no. It was the second time I'd driven him home. The short 20-minute trip stretched into a slow crawl thanks to traffic, but I didn't mind. Somewhere deep inside, I felt an unspoken joy. Jonathan leaned lazily against the passenger seat and said, "Kelvin mentioned you passed your exams?" I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him turn to look at me. Self-conscious, I touched my face. "Do I have something on me?" His lips curved. "You seem different." I almost laughed. "Funny. I was going to say the same about you. You seem a lot more reliable now." "Oh, was I unreliable before?" he teased. As the traffic cleared, I muttered, "When I first met you, you seemed like one of those clingy salesmen." He pulled out a cigarette, holding it loosely between his lips without lighting it. The sight, him, casual and sharp, felt strangely captivating. "Do you mind giving me one too?" I asked. "You really think I was that bad, huh?" He teased again, pulling out another cigarette and placing it between my lips. His fingers, cool against my skin, sent an unexplainable tremor through me. A flame flickered in front of me, and he said with a soft smile, "You're the first person I've ever lit a cigarette for." I arched a brow, an odd satisfaction blooming inside me. Consider it payment for driving you home. He laughed. That's not enough. The car stopped at a red light. Cool night air drifted in through the open windows. Staring into the darkness, he murmured, "You could ask for more." I didn't understand what he meant then. Not until we reached his building. Under the dappled shadows of plane trees, with faint light spilling onto his face, he suddenly leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a drunken mistake. His voice was calm, clear, and utterly deliberate. "I'm not drunk. I meant it." I'd been confessed to before, but never by a man. His directness caught me off guard, but what stunned me more was the kiss itself. For the first time, I understood what people meant by a kiss that makes your heart race, your blood surge. In that fleeting moment, Jonathan Palin made me feel it all. I pulled back, startled and unsure, and ran. For days, I didn't see him. The memory of that kiss felt surreal, like a dream, yet it lingered. I replayed it in my mind, the faint sweetness of alcohol, the warmth, the way it left me breathless. I asked Luna Powell what kissing someone you love felt like. She laughed, shy and curious. "Are you in love?" I shook my head. "Someone kissed me. I don't know what to do." Her teasing smile faded, and she looked at me intently. "Samuel Sleaton, you like him?" "Maybe I do." There was something about Jonathan Palin that drew me in. He was charming yet composed, wild yet restrained. Each time we met, I found myself following his lead, step by step, deeper into his orbit. I'd had countless chances to say no. But not once did I refuse. Maybe this was what it meant to like someone. I went to Far End Fitness for the first time. The receptionist greeted me with a bright smile as I pointed to a poster on the wall. "I'd like to sign up for Jonathan Palin's class. Can I see him?" When Jonathan Palin appeared, sweat still glistened on his face. He gave me his usual polite smile. "You came?" I felt embarrassed. A year had passed since he handed me that flyer, and this was my first time stepping onto his turf. I had no excuse for my deliberate appearance. If this was a game of cat and mouse, I had willingly walked into his trap. Being around him felt like a gamble with fate. Win, and it would be bliss. Lose, and it was just my own foolishness. Jonathan handed me a form and led me to the health assessment area. "Don't worry," he said casually. "It's just a standard checkup. I need your stats to design a proper workout plan." I stayed silent as he recorded everything, height, weight, body composition, all displayed neatly on his tablet. His tone was strictly professional, which made me break first. "Mr. Palin, I have something I'd like to tell you." "Alone." He glanced up at me, brows furrowing slightly. "Today might not be the best time. Is it urgent? If not, let's talk another day." He was right. This wasn't the place for private conversations. Reluctantly, I nodded. Later, he sent me a meticulously detailed fitness plan, even breaking down my daily meals. "A healthy diet is just as important. I can keep an eye on you," he wrote. It felt like he was pulling me closer, then pushing me away. The next day, I returned to the gym, but Jonathan wasn't there. The receptionist said he was out on business. I imagined him handing out flyers again and spent the afternoon aimlessly working out. While lifting weights, my arms suddenly felt lighter. Before I turned around, I heard his familiar voice, soft and encouraging, "You can add a little more weight." Sweat poured down my back as I set the barbell down, panting. Suddenly, Jonathan's hands were on my waist, steadying me. "Straighten your back," he murmured, his palms warm even through my thin shirt. His hands slipped to my abdomen as he adjusted my posture. I looked down and noticed the veins on the back of his hand, a spark of something intense flaring inside me. He patted my stomach lightly. "Not bad. You've been working out?" I tried to calm my racing heart. "Just the occasional session with Kelvin Miller." Jonathan stood in front of me then, and I noticed for the first time that he wasn't in gym clothes. He wore an expensive suit with a faint trace of alcohol lingering around him. "I heard you were here," he said, smiling. "Thought I'd stop by." "Sit down, I'll stretch you out." He dropped to the floor without hesitation, suit and all. It was as though he didn't care about anything else at that moment but me. As he pulled me into a stretch, I caught another scent beneath the alcohol, light, subtle cologne. face to face, he grabbed my hands, pushed my legs apart, and leaned me forward. Practically folded over, I joked, "Dressed like this? Were you out matchmaking?" In response, he pushed harder, making me groan in discomfort. He laughed, patting my waist. "Just a business meeting. Dinner later?" I agreed. That night, over dinner, I learned he wasn't just a trainer, he owned the gym. When he drove me back to campus, he broke the silence. "Yesterday, you said you had something to tell me. What was it?" It caught me off guard, but I had been waiting for this moment for far too long. The campus was alive with students under the bright streetlights. In that noise and energy, I found the courage to speak. "I want to kiss you." Jonathan stopped walking and turned to me, a flicker of surprise in his gaze. Then he laughed softly as though confirming my words. "Say that again?" Suddenly, I hesitated. My pulse hammered in my ears, and I finally understood what Luna Powell once said, "Liking someone made you nervous." At that moment, I was terrified. Jonathan lowered his gaze, his hand settling on my shoulder. His fingers grazed my earlobe, his voice low and deliberate. "Maybe, would you like to come over to my place?" I knew what he was suggesting. At his apartment, Jonathan ground fresh coffee beans, speaking with casual honesty. "Samuel, I'm a man. But you need to understand I'm not like other men." "I know. But you're not the same." I had never seriously considered the implications, but standing there, I thought of Luna Powell. I compared them, her and Jonathan. And I realized that everything I couldn't find with her, I had with him. "You've had a girlfriend before. You can like women," he said quietly. It was the first time someone had poured cold water on the fire in my chest, and I bristled with frustration. I walked over and watched him expertly brew coffee. "If it's that simple, then why did you confess to me? Why kiss me? Why pull me in?" Jonathan froze mid-motion. I took the cup from his hands and answered for him. "Because it's instinct. That's what love is." I took a sip. The coffee was strong, rich, slightly bitter, with a hint of acidity. It felt like the road ahead of me, unpredictable but worth it. "Mr. Palin," I said, placing the cup down. "If we happen to like each other, why not give it a try?" He lowered his head, looking as though he was conceding. "Do you know what you're asking?" "I'm asking if you want to try dating me." Jonathan stayed silent for 2 seconds, hands resting on my shoulders, his expression unreadable. I waited patiently until he finally spoke. "Want a kiss first?" The smile he wore made it impossible to say no. When I kissed him, he laughed against my lips, triumphant, as though he had won. Only then did I realize I had been walking straight into his trap all along. "Actually," he whispered, "the first time I met you, I was already planning for this day. All those encounters, all that push and pull, were just my way of making sure you were the same as me." "Well," I murmured, smiling. "Now you know. We are the same." When Kelvin Miller found out about Jonathan Palin and me, he was livid. He punched Jonathan, his hands trembling with rage as he shouted, "I told you to stay away from him. He's my best friend. How could you do this?" Jonathan didn't fight back. He took every hit willingly. By the time I got there, it took all my strength to pull the two of them apart. Kelvin was still on edge, glaring at me like I had betrayed him. "You just handed yourself to him?" I opened my mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. Jonathan, meanwhile, took my hand and joked with that casual tone of his, "I'm fine. A grown man seducing a college student into a relationship. I guess I deserved it." I sighed and turned to Kelvin. "He's not wrong and neither am I. We're not doing anything wrong by being together." Kelvin stared at me, speechless. Finally, he left without another word. After that, things settled. Jonathan and I fell into our rhythm, like birds returning to a safe forest. We spent more and more time together, growing comfortable with each other in ways I hadn't thought possible. Sometimes I stayed over at his place, and in those quiet moments, when we lay wrapped in each other's arms, I couldn't help but imagine a future, one that stretched far beyond the present. During my second year of graduate school, on my birthday, we celebrated off campus. Kelvin brought his girlfriend along, a beautiful woman named Agatha Johnson. I'd mentioned Agatha to Jonathan before, and every time he'd sternly warn me not to play around. I found his jealousy amusing, but when he finally met her in person, he couldn't resist throwing a subtle challenge her way. That's when I realized Jonathan's possessiveness ran deeper than I thought. That night, the celebration stretched late into the evening. At one point, Jonathan handed me a small gift box. My heart raced with anticipation. 2 days prior, I'd accidentally seen 2 rings tucked inside his nightstand drawer. I was certain one of them would be in that box. But when I opened it, I found a mechanical watch instead. For a moment, I was stunned, though I quickly masked it with a smile, feigning surprise. I thanked him and hugged him tightly, but the lingering unease in my chest wouldn't leave. Did he have doubts? Was he holding something back? We returned to the hotel, and as we lay together in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Jonathan pressed gentle kisses along my face and neck, murmuring softly, "Samuel, even if we can't get married, let's spend a lifetime together." His words hit me hard, and I wanted to ask, "Do you really mean forever?" But before I could speak, my hand brushed against something. There, on my ring finger, was a ring. Jonathan knelt beside the bed, holding my hand and smiling up at me. "I want us to have a home," he said softly. "My parents want to meet you. Don't worry, they respect me and they'll respect you too." Only then did I realize that his love, though understated, burned fiercely. He had been planning for our future all along, trying to give us a foundation no matter how difficult the times might be. I whispered back to him that night, "I want a home with you too." The day Jonathan took me to meet his parents, I nearly wished I could disappear and start over. Jonathan's father turned out to be none other than my graduate advisor, Dean Palin. It hit me like a brick. Suddenly, I remembered the day Jonathan had casually asked if I'd chosen a mentor, and I had said Dean Palin. That smile he gave me back then, it made sense now. He had known everything. To my surprise, Dean Palin greeted me warmly, none of the sternness he usually displayed during lab work. "Jonathan's told me a lot about you," he said kindly. I wanted to sink into the ground. But then, with that same authoritative tone I knew so well, he added, "Samuel, relationships are one thing, but don't let it interfere with your studies." Now that was the Dean Palin I knew. After dinner, as we were leaving, Dean Palin placed a hand on both our shoulders. Though he didn't say much, the look in his eyes spoke volumes. Jonathan smiled at him and said, "Thanks, Dad." Jonathan nudged me to bow properly, and as I did, I felt my eyes sting with emotion. He had brought me this far, and it was time I made an effort to bring him into my world too. I had hinted to my parents over the phone that I liked men. Each time, I was met with silence, a long, suffocating quiet. But whenever I looked at Jonathan, I felt like I could keep trying. The year I graduated, Luna Powell returned from her honeymoon and stopped by to see me, bringing her husband along. Jonathan insisted on coming to the airport with me. He was polite and friendly as always, but his presence carried a quiet possessiveness that Luna didn't miss. One glance from her, and I knew she had figured it out. She looked down at her phone and texted me a single exclamation mark. The screen showed typing for a long time before I replied, "Yes?" Luna fell silent. When she looked up again, her expression was mixed with disbelief and confusion. But she said nothing. That dinner was painfully awkward. Luna had planned to stay a day in the city but ended up changing her flight to leave that night. Before she left, she turned back to me one last time and asked, "Do your parents know?" I shook my head. "And what are you going to do?" I looked toward Jonathan. He stood by a vending machine, buying my favorite drink, his steps steady and sure as he walked back toward me. "I'm going to bring him home," I said. The day I brought Jonathan Palin back to my hometown, I lost my courage. When we arrived at the familiar doorstep, I turned to him and said, "Stay at the hotel tonight. I'll talk to my parents first. Don't worry." He understood immediately, masking his concern with a light-hearted smile. "Go on then." For those few seconds, my heart wavered. When I stepped inside, the house was warm, filled with my parents' endless questions and their comforting plans for my future. I finally took a breath and said, "I'm in a relationship." They froze for a second before breaking into relieved smiles. My dad asked where the girl was from, while my mom eagerly asked how long we'd been together. "He's from this city," I said quietly, And we've been together for over 3 years. Their smiles faltered. My mom's voice softened with excitement. What does the girl's family do? I hesitated. Under their hopeful gazes, I gave the answer that shattered everything. It's not a girl. It's a man. Silence. Then disbelief. I repeated myself, I'm in love with a man, and I want you to meet him. Can you? That was the first time my father ever hit me. His hand trembled with rage, his voice breaking as he tried to speak. He spat the cruelest words I'd ever heard, as if to shake me out of some imagined mistake. But I wasn't mistaken. For the first time in my life, I had stepped off the path they had planned, and I was certain of where I stood. Mom, Dad, I just want you to meet him, I pleaded, but all I got was a single word, get out. I packed my bag and left, standing under the cold streetlight at the entrance to my neighborhood. When I turned back, the light in my home still shone brightly, though inside, everything was in ruins. I had chosen Jonathan Palin over my parents, knowing full well it might be unforgivable. But love, as I'd always believed, was instinct. As I looked ahead, I spotted Jonathan standing under a street lamp, crushing out his cigarette. He walked over, taking in the bruise on my face with quiet understanding. Why are you here? I asked hoarsely. He smiled. Figured it wouldn't go well. I'm here to comfort you. There was something bittersweet in his tone as he threw an arm around my shoulders. Don't think about it. Come on, I'll take you to eat something good. I swatted his hand away. Do you even know where to go? Nope. You pick out. That night, we drank too much at the hotel. I said nothing, but he kept reassuring me, whatever happens, it doesn't matter. I'm just touched that you even tried for me. You don't have to be like me, he added. Everyone's different. My parents just happen to be more open-minded. I got smacked around too, you know. He pressed a cold beer can to my swollen face, grinning. Unless you don't want to be with me anymore, I'll always have ice ready for next time. I rolled my eyes. You say the stupidest things. I'm the one getting hit, not you. Jonathan's smile softened, and with the last sip of his beer, he said seriously, Samuel, we'll be okay. There's no rush. Time will take care of everything. It was the only thing strong enough to change hearts. For months, my parents refused to answer my calls. The guilt that weighed on me slowly turned into acceptance. I stopped trying to fix what couldn't be fixed, at least for now. One day, as I sat on the couch staring at a photo of Jonathan and me, I turned and watched him doing sit-ups beside the sofa. On the balcony, our laundry swayed gently in the breeze. It hit me then. This was exactly the life I had been looking for. That Christmas, my mother slipped a disc and couldn't get a doctor's appointment. When Luna Powell called to tell me, Jonathan picked up the phone while I was in the shower. When I came out, he told me the news and watched as I rushed to pack my bags. Wait, he said, stopping me. I've already arranged for Luna to bring them here. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything. Jonathan used his quiet persistence to ensure my parents got the best medical care a city had to offer. For days, I stayed by their side and slowly, the ice between us began to thaw. Jonathan occasionally stopped by the hospital, always discreet. Luna covered for us when needed, but I still felt guilty for dragging him into this. He only smiled and said, there's no hurry. One afternoon, as Jonathan dropped me off at the hospital, we saw my father standing on the steps, holding a bag of food. He looked at me, then at Jonathan. His gaze wasn't kind, and for the first time, I understood what Jonathan had meant that day when he said thank you to his own father. Hello, sir. I'm Jonathan Palin, Jonathan said calmly, extending his hand. My father ignored him and turned away. Are you coming or not? He barked at me. Jonathan patted my shoulder. Go ahead. I'll see you later. It was a long battle and we both knew it. After my mother recovered, Jonathan continued to help from the shadows, never once asking for credit. Luna teased me, your boyfriend's really good at stepping up when it counts? I smiled. Let me guess, you're making him prove himself to your parents, aren't you? I shrugged. Some debts are hard to repay. She smirked. So it's a life-saving debt repaid with your entire life, huh? I didn't answer, but she wasn't wrong. Not long before New Year's, my mother called me. Samuel, come home for the holiday this year, she said quietly. I held my breath, waiting. And, bring Jonathan with you. The relief and joy that flooded me were beyond words. When I hung up, Jonathan was sitting on the couch, scrolling through restaurant recommendations. What do you want to eat for New Year's Eve? He asked. I want to eat my mom's cooking. He looked up and I grinned. She asked me to bring you home. Jonathan stared at me, stunned, before breaking into a wide smile. He called his father immediately. I'm not coming home this year, Dad. I watched him, still in disbelief. What did you do? He smirked, knocking his knuckles lightly against my forehead. Didn't you say it yourself? Nothing can withstand sincerity. I just showed your parents how serious I am. He smiled at me, bright, proud, and endlessly patient. I told you we'll have our happy ending. And he was right. I could now say without hesitation that I loved him. I wanted to love him for the rest of my life. Not in a way that needed to be loud or extravagant, but steady, true, and enduring. No matter how long the road ahead might be, it would always belong to the two of us. The end.
Thanks for stopping by. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any new videos.